What does a woman do when her entire world shatters over a plate of overpriced risotto? For Katherine Sterling, a 7 months pregnant wife, it was a dinner designed for her humiliation. Her husband Richard and his smug mistress Tiffany thought they had won, laughing as they left her in tears. They had the money, the power, and the cruelty to break her spirit. But they never imagined who would be waiting to pick up the pieces. They never expected her to return, not in a taxi of shame, but in the silent, imposing grandeur of a millionaire's Rolls-Royce, ready to turn the tables in the most spectacular way imaginable. The house was Richard's masterpiece, a testament to his success. It was a sprawling modern structure of glass steel and stark white stone, nestled in the manicured hills of Greenwich, Connecticut. To the outside world, it was an architectural marvel, featured in magazines that Katherine, an architect by profession, used to admire. From the inside, however, it felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. It was a cold, silent space that echoed with the ghosts of a love that had long since died. Katherine traced the rim of her mug of decaffeinated tea, the warmth a small comfort against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. At 7 months pregnant, her body was a landscape of change, a constant reminder of the new life she was nurturing. This baby, a little boy they had already named Nicholas, in a rare moment of shared excitement, was supposed to be their fresh start. He was meant to be the glue that would piece their fractured marriage back together, the foundation upon which they could rebuild. But as the days bled into weeks, Katherine felt with a growing certainty that the cracks were too deep, the damage too extensive. The foundation was already dust. Richard had changed. The ambitious, charming man she had fallen in love with in college, the one who had shared her dreams of building a life and a family, was gone. In his place was a stranger who wore his success like a suit of armor. Richard Sterling, the hedge fund titan. The man who could move markets with a single phone call had become a creature of appetite and arrogance. His love had been replaced by a possessive ownership, his affection by a patronizing tolerance. He looked at her now not as his partner, but as another one of his acquisitions, a beautiful, well-bred wife to complete the picture of his perfect life. The silence of the cavernous kitchen was broken by the sharp click of expensive Italian leather on polished concrete. Richard strode in, already dressed in a bespoke suit, the dark charcoal fabric making him look severe and imposing. He didn't kiss her good morning. He hadn't in months. He went straight to the built-in espresso machine, a monstrously complex German contraption that hissed and whirred to life. "You're up early," Katherine said, her voice soft easily, swallowed by the room's high ceilings. "Big day." "Closing the Henderson deal," he replied, not turning around. He stared at the stream of dark liquid filling his cup as if it were the most important thing in the world. To him, it probably was. "That's wonderful, darling." She tried injecting a warmth she didn't feel into her tone. "We should celebrate tonight." He finally turned, leaning against the marble island. He took a sip of his espresso, his eyes scanning her with a critical detachment. She wore a simple cashmere robe, her face bare of makeup, her hair pulled back loosely. He saw not the mother of his child, but an imperfection in his perfect home. About tonight, he began placing the cup down with a sharp clink. "I need you to come to a dinner. It's with the Hendersons. It's crucial you're there." A flicker of hope ignited within Katherine. A business dinner. He wanted her there. He was including her. Maybe he still saw her as his partner after all. Of course. "Where are we going, Aurelia?" "Downtown. 8 o'clock sharp. Wear the blue dress. The one from Costello. And for God's sake, put on some makeup. You look tired. The hope flickered and died, extinguished by the casual cruelty of his words. The Costello dress was a designer piece he'd bought her 2 years ago, a relic from a time before her body had softened and swelled with pregnancy. It was a slinky, unforgiving sheath of silk that would now cling to all the wrong places, a mockery of her former self. Richard, I don't think that dress will fit. She started her hand, instinctively going to her prominent belly. I have that black maternity gown from Katherine. Don't argue with me on this. He cut her off, his voice laced with impatience. This is important. These people are old money. Image is everything. You need to look the part. Squeeze into it if you have to. It's for one night. Look the part. The word stung. She was no longer a person, just an accessory he needed to function correctly. She was the sterling wife, an extension of his brand. She nodded numbly, the fight draining out of her before it had even begun. Arguing was pointless. It would only lead to him raising his voice, his face turning a blotchy red, and the inevitable crushing silence that would follow. Okay, Richard. Aurelia at 8. Good, he said, finishing his espresso in one gulp. He picked up his briefcase, his Patek Philippe watch glinting under the recessed lighting. My driver will pick you up at 7. I'll be coming from the office and will meet you there. Don't be late. He walked out without a backward glance, without a word of goodbye. The front door clicked shut, the sound final and absolute. Katherine was left alone again in the beautiful empty house, the silence rushing back in to reclaim its territory. She looked down at her swollen belly, a gentle flutter from within, reminding her she wasn't truly alone. A wave of nausea, a familiar companion these last few months, rolled through her. But this time, it wasn't just morning sickness. It was a sickness of the soul, a deep, curdling dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. The dinner at Aurelia wasn't a celebration. It felt like a summons, a test she was already destined to fail. And as she pushed herself up from the cold, hard chair, she couldn't shake the terrifying feeling that she was walking willingly into a beautifully set trap. The hours leading up to the dinner were a slow-motion torture. Katherine moved through her day like a ghost in her own home, the weight of Richard's command pressing down on her. The blue Costello dress hung in her walk-in closet like a spectre of a woman she no longer was. It was a vibrant sapphire blue, a color that had once made her eyes sparkle. Now it just looked loud and cruel. She had tried it on around 4 o'clock. The silk, usually so forgiving, strained against the curve of her belly and the new fullness of her hips. The zipper was a battlefield. She pulled and gasped, her breath catching in her throat, her face flushed with the effort. Finally, with a grunt of pain and resignation, she managed to pull it halfway up her back, where it stopped refusing to go any further. The fabric cut into her skin, and the open back gaped pathetically. She looked in the floor-to-ceiling mirror and saw a stranger, a tired, pregnant woman trying desperately to fit into a mold that had been cast for someone else for a different life. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. This was what Richard wanted the Hendersons to see. A woman literally bursting at the seams of a life that no longer fit. Defeated, she abandoned the dress, letting it fall to the plush carpet. She instead chose a deep, emerald green velvet maternity dress. It was elegant, tasteful, and most importantly, comfortable. It draped beautifully over her bump, celebrating her pregnancy rather than fighting it. It was a dress she had bought for herself, a small act of rebellion in a life that felt increasingly dictated by her husband. She would face this dinner on her own terms, at least in this small way. She spent an hour on her makeup, carefully concealing the dark circles under her eyes, the evidence of sleepless nights spent worrying about her marriage. She contoured her face, trying to reclaim some of the definition lost to pregnancy, and applied a soft, nude lipstick. She styled her long, honey-blonde hair into gentle waves that cascaded over her shoulders. When she was done, she looked at her reflection. She saw a woman who was weary, but not broken. There was a strength in her eyes, a quiet resilience she had forgotten she possessed. For the first time all day, she felt a flicker of her old self. At precisely 7 o'clock, the sleek black town car arrived. The driver, a stoic man named Arthur, who had worked for Richard for years, held the door for her, without a word, his expression unreadable. The drive into Manhattan was a blur of suburban greenery, melting into the stark vertical lines of the city. With every mile that passed, Katherine's anxiety grew a tight knot in her chest. She clutched her small evening bag, her knuckles white. Why was this dinner so important? Who were the Hendersons really? Richard was rarely this insistent on her presence at business functions. He usually preferred to keep his professional and personal lives separate, a rule he had enforced with ruthless efficiency. The car pulled up to the curb in front of Aurelia. The restaurant was the epitome of understated Manhattan luxury. There was no garish sign, only a simple, elegant brass plaque next to a heavy oak door. A doorman in a tailored grey coat nodded grimly as he opened it for her. The interior was a hushed world of dark wood, muted lighting, and the soft clinking of silverware on porcelain. The air smelled of money, perfume, and exquisite food. The maitre d', a tall, impossibly thin man, with a practiced smile, greeted her. "Good evening, madam. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, it's under Sterling." "For Richard Sterling." The man's smile didn't falter, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of pity recognition. "Ah, yes. Mr. Sterling's table. He has already arrived. Right this way, Mrs. Sterling." He led her through the maze of tables, past the clusters of New York's elite. Faces she recognized from financial news and society pages glanced up, their gazes lingering on her pregnant form for a moment before dismissing her. She felt like an intruder, a curiosity. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Richard had said he would meet her here. Why had he lied? The maitre d' stopped at a secluded corner booth, one of the best tables in the house, offering both privacy and a commanding view of the restaurant. Richard was sitting with his back to her, deep in conversation. But he wasn't talking to an older, distinguished couple as she had expected. He was talking to a woman, a young woman with platinum blonde hair, styled in a severe, impossibly chic bob. Even from behind, Katherine could see the woman's dress. It was a garish fire engine, red cut dangerously low at the back. As the woman laughed, a sound that was high and brittle, she threw her head back, revealing a long, slender neck and a string of diamonds that glittered cruelly in the dim light. Richard turned, then sensing Katherine's presence. The smile on his face vanished, replaced by a look of cold annoyance. He stood up, not to welcome his wife, but as a reluctant formality. "Katherine," he said, his voice flat, "you're here." And then the woman in red turned. Her face was a perfect doll-like creation of fillers and Botox. Her lips plump and glossy curved into a smirk. Her eyes a pale, icy blue, raked over Katherine from head to toe, lingering on her baby bump with undisguised contempt. Katherine knew this face. She had seen it on Instagram, on gossip sites. This was Tiffany Vance, a 20-something social media influencer known for her extravagant lifestyle and a string of wealthy older boyfriends. This wasn't a business dinner. There were no Hendersons. There was only a table set for 3. So Tiffany said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness as she extended a hand adorned with perfectly manicured blood-red nails. "You must be the wife. I've heard so little about you." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation, the soft jazz music faded into a deafening roar in Katherine's ears. She stood, frozen, her hand hovering in the air, unable to process the scene before her. The corner booth, the table for 3, the smug look on Tiffany's face, and the cold, unapologetic glare from her own husband. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush, an execution. "Richard." Katherine whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this? Who is this?" "Richard," sighed an exaggerated theatrical sound of pure exasperation. "Katherine, sit down. You're making a scene." "This is Tiffany," he said, gesturing vaguely towards the woman, as if introducing a new piece of furniture. "Tiffany. This is my wife, Katherine." Tiffany's smirk widened. She finally retracted her hand, letting it rest on Richard's arm in a gesture of blatant ownership. "It's just so brave of you to come out like this." Tiffany purred, her eyes once again fixed on Katherine's belly. "All expanded. Richard told me you were letting yourself go, but my goodness." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart tipped with poison. Katherine felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Richard, pleading with her eyes for him to say something to deny it, to defend her. But he just stood there, his face a mask of indifference. He was complicit. He had planned this. He had brought her here to be torn apart by this vapid, cruel girl. Numbly, she allowed the maitre d' to pull out a chair for her. She sank into the plush leather, her body feeling impossibly heavy. A waiter appeared, instantly filling her water glass. "Can I get you a cocktail, Mrs. Sterling?" he asked politely. "She'll have water," Richard answered for her, his tone dismissive. He then turned to Tiffany with a dazzling smile, the kind he hadn't given Katherine in years. "Sweetheart, you wanted the champagne, didn't you? Let's get a bottle of the Cristal." The juxtaposition was breathtakingly cruel. He was toasting his affair with his mistress in front of his pregnant wife. The waiter, sensing the tension, scurried away. So Katherine Tiffany began again, leaning forward conspiratorially, the diamonds around her neck catching the light. "Richard tells me you're an architect." "That's so. Quaint. Do you build little doll houses? I'm more of an artist myself. My body is my canvas, you know, and my life is my masterpiece." She gestured around the opulent restaurant. "This is the kind of art I appreciate." Katherine clutched the napkin in her lap, twisting the fine linen between her fingers until her knuckles were white. She refused to give them the satisfaction of her tears. She lifted her chin, meeting Tiffany's icy gaze. "And what masterpiece are you creating tonight, Tiffany?" "The art of public humiliation." The words were quiet, but they carried a core of steel that surprised even herself. Tiffany's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She shot a look at Richard, a silent demand for him to control his wife. Richard leaned in his voice, a low, menacing hiss meant only for Katherine. "Don't you dare start. I brought you here to be civil. We need to discuss the future. our future. Our future. Katherine repeated the word, tasting like ash in her mouth. There is no our future, Richard. Not with this. She gestured with a trembling hand towards Tiffany. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Tiffany chimed in, having recovered her composure. Marriages end. It's the circle of life. People upgrade. Richard is upgrading from a station wagon to a sports car. It's not personal. She took a delicate sip of her water, her pinky finger extended. The food arrived a parade of exquisitely plated dishes that Katherine hadn't ordered. Foie gras oysters and a truffle risotto that smelled so rich it made her stomach turn. The Cristal was opened with a celebratory pop, the sound like a gunshot in the tense silence. Richard and Tiffany clinked their glasses together, their laughter echoing in Katherine's soul. They ate with gusto, talking over her as if she wasn't there. They discussed their upcoming trip to St. Bart's, the new condo Richard was buying for Tiffany in Soho, the parties they had attended. They were building a life on the ruins of hers, and they were forcing her to watch the construction. The cruelty escalated with every passing minute. You know I was helping Richard pick out baby things the other day, Tiffany said, spearing a piece of risotto. He wants the nursery to be minimalist and modern, grey and chrome. So chic. Your taste is a bit traditional, isn't it, Katherine? He showed me pictures of your house, all that comfortable furniture. It's so suburban. Katherine felt a sharp kick from the baby, as if he too could sense the malice in the air. She placed a hand on her stomach, trying to soothe him and herself. The baby's room is not your concern, Katherine said, her voice dangerously low. Richard finally intervened, but not in her defense. Tiffany is going to be a part of this child's life. Katherine, you need to accept that. She has a wonderful sense of style. She'll be a positive influence. That was the final blow. The idea of this venomous woman, this home wrecker, having any influence over her son, was more than she could bear. The carefully constructed wall of her composure crumbled. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Tiffany saw it and pounced. Oh, look, Richie, she's crying. Don't cry, Katherine. The stress is bad for the, you know. She waved a dismissive hand towards Katherine's stomach. You wouldn't want to ruin another thing, would you? Something inside, Katherine snapped. She could endure the insults to her appearance, her home, her career. But she would not sit here and let them threaten the well-being of her unborn child. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the polished floor. Several diners turned to look. She didn't care. She stood up, her entire body, trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. She looked at Richard, truly looked at him, and saw nothing of the man she had married. Only a hollow shell filled with greed and ego. You are a monster, Richard, she said, her voice clear and steady, now amplified by her fury. And you, she turned to Tiffany, whose smug expression had been replaced by one of shocked indignation, are pathetic. You think you've won a prize? You've won a man with no loyalty, no honor, and no soul. Enjoy your sports car. They always end up crashed on the side of the road. Without another word, she turned her back on them. She walked away from the table, from the half-eaten food, from the glistening champagne. She could feel every eye in the restaurant on her, could feel their pity and their judgment. But for the first time that night, she didn't care. She walked with her head held high past the maitre d's concerned face, and out through the heavy oak doors into the cold-indifferent embrace of the New York City night. The tears came then, a torrential, silent downpour as the reality of her shattered life crashed down upon her. The biting November air hit Katherine like a physical blow, a stark contrast to the suffocating warmth of the restaurant. She stood on the sidewalk, the city lights of Manhattan blurring into a chaotic kaleidoscope through her tears. Taxis whizzed past their yellow streaks, a painful reminder of her isolation. She was alone, pregnant, and utterly broken in the heart of a city that never slept. Her first instinct was to call her mother, but she couldn't. What would she say? How could she explain the depth of Richard's betrayal without completely falling apart? Her parents awed Richard. He had been the perfect, successful son-in-law. The truth would devastate them. She couldn't call her friends either. Their sympathy would feel like pity. And right now her pride was the only thing she had left. She fumbled in her clutch for her phone, her fingers numb and clumsy. She scrolled through her contacts, a list of names that suddenly felt like strangers. Then her finger paused on a name she hadn't called in years, a name from a different lifetime, a lifetime before Richard Sterling had remade her world and then destroyed it. Sebastian Thorne. Her breath hitched. Sebastian, her best friend from architecture school at Yale. They had been inseparable for 4 years, partners on impossible projects, confidants during all-night study sessions, fueled by cheap coffee and big dreams. He was brilliant, kind, and possessed a quiet intensity that had always made her feel safe. While she had dreamed of designing beautiful, functional homes for families, Sebastian's ambitions were on a grander scale. He came from old money, a family of philanthropists and titans of industry. But he was determined to make his own mark, focusing on sustainable urban development and heritage preservation. Their paths had diverged after graduation. She had met Richard falling for his dazzling ambition and had settled into a comfortable corporate design job before giving it up to support his career. Sebastian had gone on to found his own wildly successful development firm, Thorne Industries, becoming a major force in global real development. They exchanged Christmas cards and the occasional polite email, but the easy intimacy of their friendship had faded a casualty of time and distance. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over his name. It felt like an imposition, a desperate cry for help from a past he had likely forgotten. But the memory of his steady, reassuring presence was a lifeline she couldn't resist grasping. Taking a shaky breath, she pressed the call button. It rang once. Twice, she was about to hang up, her courage failing her, when he answered. Katherine. His voice was just as she remembered it, a deep, calm baritone. But there was an unmistakable note of surprise in it. Is everything all right? The simple, direct question, the genuine concern in his tone was her undoing. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ragged sound. Sebastian, she choked out. I'm so sorry to call you. I didn't know who else. Kate. What is it? Where are you? He had used her old nickname, the one only he had ever called her. The familiarity of it, the echo of a happier, more hopeful time, made her cry harder. I'm in the city, outside a restaurant called Aurelia. There was a pause on the other end, and she could hear the faint sound of shuffling papers as if he had stopped everything he was doing. I know it. Stay right where you are. Don't move. I'm 20 minutes away. I'm coming to get you. He didn't ask for explanations. He didn't question her. He just acted. It was so quintessentially Sebastian. You don't have to, she started, but he cut her off gently. Yes, I do. Just stay put, Kate. I'm on my way. The line went dead. True to his word, exactly. 19 minutes later, a car pulled up to the curb where she was huddled, trying to make herself small against the cold. But it wasn't a taxi or an Uber. It was a car that seemed to absorb the light around it, a vessel of silent, imposing elegance. A deep midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom. The back door opened, and Sebastian Thorne stepped out. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broader under a perfectly tailored cashmere coat. His dark hair was still thick now, with distinguished flecks of silver at the temples. His face was older, etched with the lines of responsibility and success. But his eyes were the same, a warm, intelligent hazel that were now filled with a deep, consuming worry as they landed on her. He walked over to her, shrugging off his heavy coat without a word, and draping it over her trembling shoulders. The wool was warm and smelled faintly of sandalwood and crisp night air. It enveloped her like a shield. "Come on," he said softly, his hand gently guiding her elbow. "Let's get you out of the cold." He helped her into the cavernous cream leather interior of the Rolls-Royce. The world outside went silent as the heavy door closed with a satisfying thud. The inside of the car was a sanctuary of warmth and quiet luxury. Sebastian slid in beside her, his presence filling the space. He didn't pry or push for details. He simply looked at her, his expression a mixture of anger at whoever had hurt her and profound sadness for her pain. "Where do you want to go, Kate?" he asked gently. "Home." She flinched at the word. The cold glass house in Greenwich wasn't a home. It was a crime scene. The place where her heart had been slowly suffocated. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "I can't go back there. Not tonight. Not with him." Sebastian nodded, his jaw tightening for a moment. "All right. Then you'll come with me. I have a penthouse in the city. There are plenty of guest rooms. You'll be safe there." Tears of gratitude streamed down her face. In a single evening, one man had systematically dismantled her worth, while another had appeared out of the past to piece it back together with quiet dignity and unwavering kindness. "But my things," she faltered. "My clothes, my prenatal vitamins, everything is at the house." Sebastian looked at her, his gaze steady. "We'll go there first. We'll get what you need for the night. You won't be going alone." He leaned forward and spoke to his driver through the intercom. "Arthur, take us to the Sterling residence in Greenwich, please." The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, gliding through the city traffic with an unhurried grace. As they drove towards the home she had once thought was her future, Katherine felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. She was terrified of the confrontation that lay ahead, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had a beacon in the storm, and he was sitting right beside her. The drive to Greenwich was made in a comfortable silence. Sebastian didn't press her for the story, sensing she wasn't ready to recount the humiliating details. Instead, he simply offered his presence as a silent, unshakable support. He had the driver stop at an all-night pharmacy, and he personally went in to buy her a bottle of water and the best prenatal vitamins they had on the shelf, a small but incredibly thoughtful gesture that spoke volumes. As the Rolls-Royce turned onto the long private driveway leading to her house, Katherine's heart began to pound, a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The house was lit up, every light blazing against the dark Connecticut woods. Richard's Porsche 911 was parked haphazardly near the entrance, its flashy, aggressive lines looking almost vulgar next to the timeless elegance of the Phantom. "It looks like he's home," she whispered, her voice barely audible. A car she didn't recognize, a white Range Rover, was parked behind the Porsche. Tiffany's car. The realization sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. They had come here, to her home. "Stay in the car for a moment," Sebastian said, his voice calm but firm. He got out first, his tall frame silhouetted against the house's harsh architectural lighting. He opened her door and held out a hand to help her out. His grip was strong and reassuring. Just as Katherine's feet touched the gravel, the front door of the house was thrown open. Richard stood there, his tie loosened, his face flushed with anger and champagne. Tiffany was right behind him, clinging to his arm, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. She was wearing one of Katherine's silk robes, a deliberate, intimate violation that was meant to sting. "Katherine." "Where the hell have you been, Richard?" bellowed his voice, echoing in the still night. "You run out of the restaurant, make a fool of me, and then you just disappear. I've been calling you for an hour." His eyes then fell on Sebastian, who stood calmly by Katherine's side. He took in Sebastian's expensive coat, his confident posture, and the colossal Rolls-Royce gleaming behind him. Richard's angry expression morphed into one of confusion and suspicion. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded. Tiffany's eyes, however, were glued to the car. Her jaw went slack, the smugness momentarily wiped from her face. She recognized the emblem on the grille, the iconic Spirit of Ecstasy. She knew exactly what a Rolls-Royce Phantom represented. It wasn't just wealth. It was a different stratosphere of power, one that made Richard's new money look like pocket change. "This is Sebastian Thorne," Katherine said, her voice finding a new strength she didn't know she possessed. "An old friend." Richard scoffed, his arrogance returning. "An old friend with a fancy car. Did you run off crying to some rich guy to solve your problems?" He took a step forward, his demeanor becoming menacing. "You need to come inside, Katherine. We have things to discuss, and your friend can leave." Sebastian didn't flinch. He took a subtle step, positioning himself slightly in front of Katherine, a protective barrier. "Mrs. Sterling won't be staying here tonight," he said, his voice low and even, yet it carried an authority that cut through Richard's bluster. "She is coming with me. We are only here to retrieve some of her personal belongings." The use of Mrs. Sterling was deliberate, a subtle reminder of Katherine's status, a status Tiffany was currently trying to usurp while wearing her stolen robe. Tiffany let out a high-pitched, mocking laugh. "Oh, please, she's not going anywhere. This is her home. This is where her husband is." She tightened her grip on Richard's arm. "Where we are." Richard seemed emboldened by her support. "You heard her. Get off my property before I call the police." Sebastian smiled, a thin, humorless expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Please do," he said calmly. "I'm sure the Greenwich police would be very interested to learn why a man's heavily pregnant wife feels unsafe in her own home, especially when her husband has brought his mistress here. I imagine the local papers would find that quite compelling too. Richard Sterling, hedge fund manager. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Richard's face paled. He lived and died by his reputation. A messy public scandal was the last thing he needed, especially with the Henderson deal still pending. He was trapped. "Katherine is just being emotional," he stammered, trying to regain control. "She's pregnant, hormonal." "I'm not emotional, Richard." "I'm done," Katherine said, stepping out from behind Sebastian. The sight of Tiffany in her robe in her home had burned away the last vestiges of her fear, replacing it with a cold, hard resolve. "I'm getting my things and I'm leaving. You can stay here with your upgrade." She brushed past Richard and Tiffany, who looked at her with stunned disbelief, and walked into her own house. The air was thick with Tiffany's cloying perfume. A half-empty bottle of champagne and 2 glasses sat on the living room coffee table. They hadn't just come here. They had been celebrating. The violation was absolute. Sebastian followed her in his presence, a silent declaration that she was not to be trifled with. He stood by the doorway, a sentinel guarding her retreat while she went upstairs to her bedroom. Her hands shook as she packed a small overnight bag. She took her toiletries, a change of clothes, her laptop, and a small framed photo of her and her parents from her bedside table. She left behind everything Richard had ever bought her, the jewelry, the designer clothes, the empty trappings of a gilded cage. When she came back downstairs, bag in hand, the scene in the foyer was even more tense. Richard was pacing, muttering into his phone, likely to his own lawyer. Tiffany was glaring at Sebastian with a mixture of awe and raw jealousy. She was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that there were levels to the game she was playing, and she had just been spectacularly outmatched. Katherine walked straight to the door, not giving either of them a second glance. "You can't just leave," Richard yelled, ending his call. "What about the baby? What about us?" Katherine finally stopped and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "There is no us anymore. Richard, you made that perfectly clear tonight. As for the baby, High Lawyer will be in contact with yours to discuss the next steps." The word lawyer hit Richard like a punch to the gut. This was real. This was happening. He looked from Katherine's determined face to Sebastian's impassive one, and for the first time a flicker of genuine fear entered his eyes. Katherine walked out of the house and didn't look back. Sebastian held the door of the Rolls-Royce for her, and she slid back into the sanctuary of the car. As they pulled away, the last thing she saw in the rearview mirror was Richard and Tiffany, standing on the doorstep of the cold glass house, looking small and insignificant in the receding darkness. The penthouse Sebastian owned was on the top 2 floors of a historic pre-war building overlooking Central Park. Unlike Katherine's stark modern house, this was a home filled with warmth, character, and history. Books lined the walls, comfortable, well-made furniture was arranged in inviting clusters, and impressive pieces of art, both modern and classical, were displayed with a curator's eye. It was a space that was both luxurious and deeply personal. It was everything she had once dreamed of creating for herself. Sebastian showed her to a sprawling guest suite with its own sitting room and a marble bathroom larger than her first apartment. He had already arranged for a tray with herbal tea fruit and light sandwiches to be brought up. "Get some rest, Kate," he said, his voice gentle. "My staff is very discreet. You won't be disturbed. We can talk about everything in the morning or whenever you're ready." Left alone, Katherine finally allowed the events of the night to wash over her. But instead of the crippling despair she expected, she felt a strange new sensation. Clarity. The fog of her unhappy marriage had lifted, revealing the stark, ugly truth. Richard had not just cheated on her. He had tried to humiliate and break her. He had underestimated her completely. The next morning, she awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the large windows. For the first time in months, she had slept through the night. She found Sebastian in his study, a magnificent room with a view of the park waking up below. He was on the phone, and she caught snippets of the conversation. Unacceptable leverage. complete breach of fiduciary duty. Yes, alert the board. I want a full audit of every fund he manages by noon. He listened for a moment, his expression hardening. I don't care. His personal life has just become a professional liability, a very significant one. He hung up and turned to her, a faint apology in his eyes. I'm sorry you had to hear that. Was that about Richard? She asked quietly. Sebastian nodded, gesturing for her to sit in one of the leather armchairs opposite his desk. Thorne Industries has a significant amount of capital invested in the fund Richard manages. Or I should say had. I'm pulling all of it. Katherine was stunned. Just because of what he did to me. Not just that. Sebastian explained, his voice taking on a harder edge. Men who are reckless and cruel in their personal lives are often the same in their professional ones. Richard's behavior last night showed a shocking lack of judgment and a penchant for unnecessary risk. That's not someone I can trust with my investors' money. I made a few calls this morning. It seems Richard Sterling has been playing fast and loose with more than just his marriage vows. There are whispers of insider trading related to the Henderson deal he was so proud of. It turns out my pulling our capital is likely to trigger a margin call he can't meet. It will expose everything. The scale of it was dizzying. Richard hadn't just orchestrated a cruel dinner. He had signed his own professional death warrant. His attempt to humiliate her was about to cost him everything he held dear, his money, his reputation, his entire career. I didn't want to ruin him, Katherine said, a pang of the old loyalty she once felt for him surfacing. You didn't, Kate Sebastian said firmly. He ruined himself. A man builds his life on a foundation of choices. Richard chose to build his on greed, deceit, and cruelty. A foundation like that is bound to collapse. You just happened to be the one to knock on the door when it was ready to fall. His words were a comfort, absolving her of a guilt she shouldn't have been feeling. Over the next few hours, Katherine told him everything. The years of emotional neglect, the slow erosion of their love, the final brutal display at the restaurant. Sebastian listened patiently, his anger on her behalf a quiet, simmering force in the room. When she was finished, he leaned forward. I've already engaged a legal team for you. The best divorce attorney in New York, a woman named Helen Croft. She's ruthless, and she specializes in cases like this. She'll ensure you and Nicholas are protected and provided for. You won't have to speak to Richard again if you don't want to. The relief was so immense, it was physical. He had thought of everything. He had taken the burden from her shoulders before she even had to ask. As predicted, Richard's world began to unravel with astonishing speed. The news of Thorne Industries pulling its massive investment sent shockwaves through his firm. His other investors, spooked by the sudden move, started asking questions. The Henderson deal collapsed. By the end of the week, the SEC had launched a formal investigation into his trading activities. The man who had seemed so powerful and untouchable just days before was now facing financial ruin and possible jail time. His downfall was swift and public. He called Katherine incessantly, his messages swinging wildly from furious threats to pathetic, desperate pleas for her to help him to call Sebastian off. She never answered. Tiffany, true to her nature, abandoned the sinking ship immediately. Once the money dried up and the scandal hit the gossip columns, she was gone. Katherine saw a post on her Instagram a week later. Tiffany was in Dubai, draped over the arm of a new, older, and apparently more stable billionaire. She was a parasite forever in search of a new host. Richard was left with nothing but the consequences of his own actions, a fitting end for a man who believed he could have everything without paying any price. He was the architect of his own ruin, and the blueprints had been drawn up with cruelty and arrogance. 6 months passed. The harsh New York winter gave way to a vibrant, hopeful spring. The city was bursting with life, and for the first time in a very long time, so was Katherine. The divorce had been finalized. Helen Croft, the formidable lawyer Sebastian had hired, had been as brilliant as promised. She had systematically dismantled Richard's legal team, uncovering hidden assets and exposing his financial misconduct. In the end, Richard, facing overwhelming legal pressure and public disgrace, had agreed to a settlement that was more than generous. Katherine was awarded the Greenwich house, which she immediately put on the market, and a significant portion of their liquid assets, securing her and her son's future completely. But Katherine didn't want Richard's money. She wanted her own life. She never moved back into the glass house. Instead, she took up Sebastian's offer to stay in his penthouse guest suite while she figured out her next steps. The arrangement, which started as a temporary sanctuary, slowly and naturally evolved into something more. They fell back into the easy rhythm of their old college friendship, rediscovered over quiet dinners, long walks in Central Park, and late-night conversations about architecture and life. Sebastian never pushed, never presumed. He simply provided a space for her to heal, to breathe, to remember who she was before Richard Sterling had tried to erase her. He saw her not as a broken victim, but as the strong, brilliant, creative woman he had always known. One evening, as they were looking over some blueprints for a new community arts center his company was funding, Sebastian turned to her. "I have a proposal for you, Kate," he said, his expression serious. Her heart skipped a beat. "Thorne Industries has a philanthropic arm, the Thorne Foundation," he continued. "We fund and build cultural centers, libraries, and affordable, beautifully designed housing projects all over the world. But we lack a chief creative officer, someone with a real vision, a passion for creating spaces that nurture people. Someone like you." He slid a portfolio across the large oak table. It was a formal proposal outlining a position created just for her. It wasn't charity. It was a genuine opportunity, a role that perfectly matched the dreams she had all but abandoned. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were tears of profound joy. "Sebastian, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," he said with a warm smile. "The salary is obscene, the travel is extensive, and your boss is an old friend who already knows you're a genius." She accepted, of course. She threw herself into the work, her passion for architecture rekindled and burning brighter than ever before. She traveled, she designed, she managed teams, she brought beauty and functionality to communities that needed it most. Her work gave her a purpose that was entirely her own. She was no longer just Mrs. Sterling. She was Katherine the architect, a woman of vision and substance. Her relationship with Sebastian deepened with each passing day. It was a love built not on fiery passion or grand empty gestures, but on a foundation of mutual respect, deep admiration, and a shared history that felt like coming home. He was there for every doctor's appointment, every milestone. He was the one who held her hand when she went into labor. Nicholas Sterling was born on a sunny afternoon in June. He had Katherine's blonde hair, and as he grew, Sebastian's calm, intelligent eyes. 1 year after that fateful dinner at Aurelia, Katherine stood on the balcony of her new home, a beautiful light-filled brownstone in the West Village that she had designed herself and which Sebastian now shared with her. She held Nicholas in her arms, rocking him gently, as they watched the sun set over the Hudson River. Sebastian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around both of them. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his presence a comforting warmth. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. She smiled a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "I was just thinking about blueprints," she said. "How sometimes you have to tear down the entire faulty structure to find the right foundation. How sometimes the most beautiful designs are the ones you never saw coming." She had walked into that restaurant, a broken wife, a victim in a story written by a cruel man. She had walked out and stepped into a new life, one of her own design. It was a life built not with steel and glass, but with resilience, dignity, and a love that was as quiet, strong, and enduring as the city skyline before them. The mistress's mockery had been the catalyst, the millionaire's Rolls-Royce, the escape vehicle. But the journey back to herself that had been all her own. Katherine's story is a powerful reminder that the end of one chapter is often the beginning of a truly magnificent one. It's a journey from the depths of betrayal to the heights of self-discovery, proving that true strength isn't about enduring cruelty, but about having the courage to walk away from it and build something new. Richard and Tiffany believed their power came from their money and their malice, but they were wrong. Real power lies in integrity, kindness, and the unwavering support of those who truly see us. It's a testament to the fact that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or designer labels, but in dignity, integrity, and the strength to rebuild. If Katherine's journey from heartbreak to triumph resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of justice and empowerment. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.